So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who owns a small business here in Seattle, and they were having to do some layoffs. Our conversation shifted to how the employees reacted when the news was delivered that their jobs were, that they were being laid off. And one of the employees got very, emotional and combative and said, "Well, every other company I've worked at, they're required to provide you severance." No, they're not. And it got me to thinking about some other layoffs we've heard in the news lately, notably Starbucks. I'm going to pick on them because I used to work there. As you'll recall, and I'll link the video here, a few weeks ago, I talked about how Starbucks was laying off 900 people from corporate, closing 1% of their stores. And it got me to thinking about what Starbucks did for their employees in a layoff. And I wanted to come on here and kind of talk about what goes into a layoff from both perspectives, from the perspective of the impacted employee and how that feels, but also from the perspective of the employer and what goes into those decisions. So first of all, I mentioned Starbucks decided to close 1% of its stores. Roughly 2,500 people from the store level were impacted in these store closures. Now, Starbucks did try to transfer them to other stores, but in some cases, employees were, or partners as they're called at Starbucks, partners were unable to find work at other stores and therefore had to be let go from the organization. Starbucks actually did, in my opinion, kind of the right thing. Now, you may be saying, "Rob, they did not give those employees enough money." Fair, it's never going to be enough money, right? But Starbucks did what they could. So for baristas, they got 60 hours of pay. For shift supervisors, 84 hours of pay. And they even gave some severance money to part-time employees. That's kind of unheard of in the severance game, but we'll get into that more in a minute. They also gave them a lump sum payment equivalent to what they would pay COBRA benefits continuance for 3 months so that they're not left high and dry with respect to health benefits. Now, this is probably hundreds of dollars, maybe in some employees' cases, thousands of dollars that they're getting paid out. It's not a huge amount of money for them, but here's the thing. Starbucks didn't have to do any of it. They could have just said, "Your time here is done and best wishes," and called it a day. But they didn't. They chose to pay out some severance. So let's get to some myth busting here. First of all, companies owe you severance when they lay you off. No, they don't. They don't owe you any severance. There is no law on the books that requires severance. There is something called the WARN Act. So what the WARN Act says, there must be a amount of warning, in this case, 60 days, to when you have a large group of employees that are impacted. That's the only legal requirement. Severance is not part of that equation. So unless you're under some sort of union contract or other type of agreement, there's no automatic severance. And I know that you think that's outrageous, and I don't disagree with you. I think that when companies do this, they should do their best to help employees have a soft landing or soften the blow. Now, one thing I will say that Starbucks most likely did, and when I was there, we included this as part of our severance packages, was some outplacement services. So they would contract with a service provider that helps people with, getting interviews, resume writing, all the things. And I know what you're thinking, in this job market, none of that's going to help. But I would argue that point in saying any little bit helps. So if the company is providing this free for its employees that have been impacted, they should absolutely leverage that. So myth number 2 is loyalty. I've been loyaled and I deserve something. Sure, no argument here from an emotional standpoint, but from a legal standpoint, no. Again, there's no law in the book saying that the companies have to do anything for you on your way out the door. So there's 2 schools of thought here, right? Employees may think, I gave you years of my life to this company. I was loyal to you. You, company, owe me a safety net. Whereas the company would look at it differently and say, thank you for your service. We've paid you for all the time you worked here as an employee, and therefore we owe you nothing more. Neither side is totally wrong, but that doesn't soften the blow. They're just playing by different rules of the game. And I've heard some people say this too. This leads me to the third myth on my list, and that if they're offering severance, the company is just being generous. No, no, that I absolutely disagree with that. Might there be some exceptions? Perhaps. Maybe in the case of Starbucks, there could be some generosity there, but by and large, severance is often offered to mitigate risk. It's brand protection, it's legal insulation, it's the companies basically saying, don't sue us and don't roast us on TikTok. So from the employer's side, why would they do this? If they don't have to, if there's no law saying they have to provide severance to impacted employees, why would they do this? And in the case of Starbucks, they went even further because some companies, if they're giving out severance, it might be to only headquartered or more white collar employees, right, at the mothership. But Starbucks went as far as to not only include that group, include frontline employees and include part-timers. Again, those types of extra steps are kind of not the norm in the severance game. And it could be a signal that Starbucks is sending to their employees or former employees saying, hey, we know this sucks. We hope this helps soften the blow for you so your immediate needs are met for at least a certain amount of time while you're still looking for a new job. Also, it's a signal to the people that are still working there. It's saying, hey, we live by our values, and by our values, we are treating these employees with the utmost respect we can as we had to make some difficult decisions. So if you've never been in a layoff before, great, I'm happy for you. But if you find yourself in your first layoff, you may think, where's my payout? Where's my months of salary that everybody else gets? Where's my benefits extension? The truth is, those things are not guaranteed. So if you want a better severance package, you've got to first know what gives you better negotiating power. So if you are more tenured or have a higher level role in the organization, you've probably got some leverage there because most severance packages are calculated with a base package involved, and then it usually goes up incrementally based on an employee's years of service. So from that standpoint, if you have, a dozen years on somebody else, you could argue that you're owed more money on your way out the door. The next thing on the list is if there is a potential legal risk that puts the company at risk of litigation. If there's going to have some exposure, they will pay you. You're probably thinking, okay, Rob, they can pay me more money. That doesn't mean I won't sue them. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you do get a severance document and you have to sign it before you get that check, in that document is a clause that will state something like, by signing this document, you waive any future claim you have against the company. So you're basically signing away your right to come back and sue that company. And that will come up in any type of lawsuit. In fact, if you engage an employment attorney, that will be the first thing they ask you. What did you sign? If there is potential legal risk, they may give you more money, but you're still going to have to sign away your right to come after them in the future. The last thing, and I think this group is not in a good negotiating position, because if I'm talking about the frontline people, the frontline positions that are eliminated en masse, if we're treating this whole group together the same exact way and using the same exact calculus to come to a dollar amount for their severance, you don't have much negotiating power because they're treating everybody consistently. So unless you have something that puts the company at legal risk, like we mentioned a second ago, or you have more tenure, which should be part of the calculation, you really don't have a good position to negotiate from. Okay, I know that's a bit of a downer. So let's talk about what you should do if, unfortunately, you find yourself sitting across the table from your boss and potentially an HR person. Or worse, because if you've watched my other videos on layoffs, you know how this just pisses me off is when people aren't treated with respect in this conversation. What I mean by that is Southwest Airlines did it, Starbucks has done it, and I've heard of other ones doing it as well, where they're laying people off without a modicum of respect. They are just sending an email saying effective immediately, your position's gone, or they're doing it via Zoom, a recorded Zoom, which is even worse, Southwest Airlines. Or in the case of Starbucks, I do think it showed up via email. They were notified that their position had been impacted. I'm old school. You can see the gray kind of popping up in my beard. I'm old school. I think that you should have a conversation with the company representatives to say, they should look you in the eye and say, unfortunately, your job has been eliminated and let me walk you through this severance package. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent, but what you should do in that moment, so hopefully they're treating you with respect and looking you in the eye, what you should do is consider the package. You don't sign it in the moment. I've seen people want to do that. They just want it over with. They're like, I'm going to sign it and move on with my life. Don't do that. take it home, make sure you're reviewing it. And actually, if a good HR person is sitting in that room with you, they will not let you sign it on the spot. They will want you to take it home. You can return it next day, but they want you to make sure you read over it. And of course, you can have an attorney look at it. And sadly, these are all going to be boilerplate severance packages. They're going to be standardized. So you can have an attorney look at it, but they're probably going to say, yeah, there's not much room to negotiate here. But by all means, I'm not an attorney. I've said that 100 times. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm not an attorney. So you go, if you feel you need to have somebody look at it, that is absolutely your right to do. I mentioned this before, but read before you sign. Know what you're signing away. Your right to sue, your right to disparage the company. So I'm going to talk about this in a couple other videos that I'm recording today. But what you say publicly, what you say on social media, that document you sign could have a non-disparagement clause, which works both ways. The company won't say anything bad about you, and you can't say something bad about the company. So think about that you could be signing away as well. And if you do go out there and something you put on social media goes viral, you could put yourself at risk for the company to come after you and say, look, we want our money back because you violated this agreement we entered into with you so you could get the severance. Do I think they would do that? Maybe. Depends on the company. It depends on what was being said, but it could be a risk. So you might not want to do that. So again, what I mean to underline here is know what you're signing. Make sure you read the fine print and then go ahead and sign it. Because again, you're not going to get that money unless you actually sign that document. Now, I've had some people actually get the severance agreement and then never return it. They don't get their money. They don't put up a fight. They don't do anything. I had one person, actually two, that actually didn't want to further cause problems financially for the organization they were being laid off from and said, no, you keep the money, I'll be fine. No, do not do that. You need to look out for yourself anymore. The loyalty to the company is probably admirable, but in that equation, you should be taking anything they will give you as parting gifts. So make sure you're reading it, signing it, and getting your check. The next thing you need to do, maybe the following day at the latest, is start that unemployment benefits process. File for unemployment. Start that process because it can be a bit laborious and tedious to get going, and it could take some time. We all know how the government's working lately, right? Is it working? At the time of this recording, it's not. State government's working, so the unemployment process still should keep going, but make sure you do it sooner than later. Otherwise, it's just going to delay payment for you getting the benefits you deserve and have coming to you and can keep the lights on in your house. Then use that money strategically. Make sure you're putting some away for an emergency fund. Oh my gosh, I sound like my dad. Cover your essential and your basics, right? And you might think about investing in training or something else to get you ready for that new job. One thing it should not be used. And this is a real life example. Somebody said to me, oh, this is perfect. That'll cover me a good week in Mexico where I can go and decompress and then I'll look for a job on the back end. You do you. I think that's a horrible idea. You're just going to make the matters worse when you come back, especially in today's job market, and realize that it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to get a new job in this market. But make sure you're thinking about where you're socking that money away so you can make it stretch for as long as necessary till you get that next job. Layoffs will always seem unfair. And because from an emotional standpoint, they are unfair. You give your loyalty, your effort, and in many cases, your identity to a company, and it can all be gone with a simple meeting invite on your calendar to deliver some bad news. But business, it's not about emotion. No matter how much, you hear things like the cringeworthy, we're one big family here, right? Businesses have to make decisions devoid of emotion in some cases. And if you don't have an agreement that guarantees severance, the company isn't breaking their promise to you. They're actually playing by the rules that they set out at the beginning of the relationship with you. But that said, the good ones, the good companies, and I still believe, despite some of you arguing with me in the comments, that there are really good companies out there. And I do believe Starbucks does strive to do the right thing, even in making some of these tough decisions about the future state of their business and who's going to still be employed there. So in closing, do companies owe you severance? No. Do they owe you some respect? In my opinion, they do. So pay attention to what you're signing, read the fine print, and know what your next move is going to be with respect to how to navigate that layoff process. So have you ever been laid off? How did it go? Did they treat you with respect? How did they tell you the news? Did they send you an email? Did your badge just not work one day and that was your notification? How'd it go? Let me know in the comments. I would really be interested to hear all of the different stories of how people have unfortunately been impacted by a layoff. If you are in a company and thankfully have not been laid off, I congratulate you. I wish you continued success and that you thrive in that organization. If you have found yourself on the receiving end of a layoff, I do hope that your job search process is super short and you actually land a better role than the one you had before. And if you like this type of content, I would absolutely be honored if you would like this video and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, take care. My name's Rob.
Moments connect the dots. Dreams don't wait, so take your shot. Will that happen? Now what? Now what?
This video was recorded and produced by Just Talk Studios, the premier video podcasting studio in Bellevue, Washington. Visit justtalkstudios.com to learn more and book your session today.